welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening a custom-tailored file that, well, it sits at this really volatile intersection of technology, global finance, and I think the ultimate price of convenience.
It really does.
And based on our source material, this isn't going to be some detached, academic discussion about central banking policy. This is an urgent defensive discussion about the very structure of freedom.
That's absolutely right.
We're looking at the global movement towards central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, and these instant payment rails like FedNow. And our source material is, frankly, unified in its analysis. This transition represents the ultimate loss of financial autonomy.
Yeah, our mission today is to treat this shift, which, governments frame it as just modernization, as a fundamental threat. The core document we've pulled from is titled, quite starkly, The War on Cash.
Just puts it right out there.
It does. And it forces us to analyze these developments from what it labors a conspiracy reality angle. We're here to extract the chilling implications of how unnecessary freedom is being forfeited under this very comfortable guise of technological advancement.
A comfortable guise. That's a good way to put it.
And the stakes, as the source repeatedly stresses, they're existential. It's the difference between financial independence and complete digital subservience.
Okay, let's unpack this and jump right into the hook, because it starts with something so relatable, something everyone's done.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the last time you paid for something with physical money, maybe pulling out a $20 bill for groceries or a coffee. That simple physical exchange, it feels permanent, right? It feels guaranteed.
Oh, of course. It's final.
But the consensus across all the material we analyzed is, it's cold. It says physical cash is now just a legacy system. And the global plan, whether it's stated openly or just implied by the infrastructure they're building, is for legacy systems to be deleted.
And this deletion isn't planned as, one single painful event that everyone would notice and react to. It's a textbook case of the boiling frog analogy.
Right.
You don't panic and jump out of the pot if the heat is turned up slowly enough, over years. And we have been systematically, incrementally exchanging our privacy for ever-increasing convenience. We're being prepared for this final leap into a fully controlled environment.
I think we have to analyze that priming process in detail, because it really shows how expertly the system leverages our desire for ease and speed to create a structure of surveillance.
It began decades ago. You can call it phase one. The mass introduction and adoption of credit cards, electronic funds transfers.
What was the pitch?
Pure convenience. You don't need to carry wads of cash. You can shop anywhere in the world. You get points, rewards. But the cost was profound. For the first time, nearly every single transaction created a centralized, trackable digital history.
We basically built the first layer of the surveillance architecture ourselves, willingly.
We did. And then phase two just accelerates that data centralization, and it often targets the younger, digitally native generations.
That's where things like Venmo and Apple Pay come in.
Precisely. Phase two brought those peer-to-peer payment apps. The pitch shifted from just convenience to blinding speed. Transactions became instant, frictionless, and frankly, cool.
Yeah, it was a social thing. Splitting a bill, paying a babysitter.
Getting your share of the rent immediately. But every single one of those microtransactions, no matter how small, is mediated, recorded, centralized, and aggregated. The economy became a perpetually open book for all the intermediaries.
And then, of course, the government and the regulators see this massive stream of data, and they decide they need direct access. Which brings us to phase three.
Yes. The continuous political fight to lower IRS reporting thresholds.
The $600 rule.
That's the one. For years, there has been this consistent political push to make sure they could spy on the side hustles, the small businesses, the casual transfers. Remember those controversial legislative attempts to require banks to report every account flow over a meager $600?
It caused a huge uproar.
It did, but the intent was clear. To eliminate the private, anonymous cash economy entirely and gain a God view of the everyday American's finances. That effort, even though it was stalled for now, it revealed the desire for universal transaction tracking.
And now, according to our sources, we are at the crisis point. The source states that the cage door is swinging shut. And the scope of this is, it's frighteningly global.
It is. This is not theoretical. It's not regional. The data shows that 130 countries, which represent a staggering 98% of global GDP, are actively exploring, piloting, or have already launched central bank digital currencies.
98%.
98. This signals a coordinated systemic shift away from traditional permissionless money towards centralized, programmable liabilities.
And that takes us to the crucial definition we absolutely have to nail down early. Programmable money. Because I think a lot of listeners might think, well, my bank account is digital, my money is already online. How is a CBDC different from what I already have?
It is fundamentally, legally, and functionally different. The money in your bank account right now is technically a liability of a commercial bank.
Like Chase or Bank of America.
Exactly. And while it's tracked, it still operates with a degree of fungibility, meaning it can be used for any legal purpose without a central authority stepping in, unless, a court order is issued. A CBDC is not that.
Okay.
And the source uses this incredibly powerful analogy to define the difference. It says the money you have now, even though it's tracked, is like a wild wolf. It has its own inherent autonomy.
Wild wolf.
A CBDC, on the other hand, is a dog on a shock collar.
Wow. A controllable token that only answers to the master. That metaphor really drives home the structural change. Money moves from being a private, fungible asset you own.
To a controllable digital token you are merely allowed to use.
And allowed under specific and potentially revocable conditions.
That is the essence of the shift. And it highlights the ultimate conclusion of this deep dive, which is stated so urgently in the source material. The war on cash is not a technological innovation story. It is the calculated structural preparation that grants the state the ability to turn off your ability to transact.
And thus turn off your life.
With the push of a button.
Okay, so let's move forward and really solidify that conceptual shift. Section 1, the transformation of money from bare asset to government voucher. We have to start with that old legacy definition of cash to really understand what's at stake, what's being lost.
Right. The foundational concept is the bearer instrument.
Bearer instrument.
When we talk about cash, a physical dollar, it has these critical features that, well, they confer maximum freedom and autonomy. If I hand you a $100 bill, four defining features are instantly realized.
Okay, what are they?
First, the transaction is settled. There's absolute finality. Once that bill is in your hand, it's yours, period. Second, it's peer-to-peer. No intermediary, no bank, no payment processors involved, just you and me.
Right. No middleman.
Third, it is permissionless. We don't need anyone's approval for the exchange. And fourth, and this is crucial, it has no history attached to the token itself for a middleman or government agency to scrutinize.
That structural freedom is what makes cash inherently resistant to any kind of centralized authoritative control. So now, let's pivot and contrast that essential definition of cash directly with a CBDC.
A CBDC is the optical and legal inverse. The sources all stress that a CBDC is designated as a direct liability of the Federal Reserve.
And that's the key technical distinction.
It's the distinction that unlocks absolute control. To get the gravity of this, you have to know that your current bank money is a liability of a commercial bank, which carries certain risks, like a bank failure, though you have FDIC insurance, but it also acts as a regulatory buffer.
It's a layer between you and the central bank.
A CBDC cuts out this buffer entirely. It is not an asset you own, like physical gold or a piece of paper currency. It's just a digital entry in a centralized single ledger government database that you are merely allowed to access and use.
So the legal relationship shifts from ownership to revocable access. And this is where the central bankers, who usually speak in this very careful, modulated, bureaucratic language, have made some shocking admissions.
They really have. We have the direct quote from Augustin Carstens. He's the head of the Bank for International Settlements, the institution that basically coordinates the global monetary system.
The central bank of central banks.
Pretty much. And he stated this openly, and it's arguably the single most damning quote illustrating the motive behind all of this. He said, "With cash, we don't know who's using it.
Okay.
With CBDC, the central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that liability."
Absolute control. He didn't say better reporting or improved anti-money laundering tools. He said absolute control on the rules and regulations that govern its use.
Which fundamentally destroys the foundational concept of fungible money. It's no longer a universal medium of exchange.
It strips away all pretense of being for the consumer's benefit and just lays bare the true intention.
It does. Money stops being money and it becomes a voucher, or what one source calls company store scrip.
Like in the old coal mining towns.
Exactly. A voucher, by definition, is restricted. If you're given a specific food voucher, you can't use it to pay for tuition. CBDCs extend this principle of programmed restriction across the entire economic system.
Let's delve into those programmable restrictions, because this moves the discussion from high finance right into social engineering. What specific derived examples do our sources suggest are possible when money becomes a compliance tool?
The ability to program money means the government can dictate, through code embedded in the currency itself, what you can buy, where you can buy it, and when you can buy it.
So specific items.
Right. The examples we've extracted are specifically chosen because they touch on highly politicized, compliant behavior. Imagine a CBDC that is coded with an expiration date if it's not spent in specific sectors, like a local stimulus voucher that has to be spent on small businesses within 30 days.
Okay, that's one level.
hmm
But the danger really escalates when these restrictions are tied to personal behavior and social goals.
Exactly. Now we move into ideological enforcement. The source material details restrictions on buying ammunition if a citizen is deemed, say, politically undesirable,
Wow.
or restrictions on purchasing certain types of food, like meat, if it conflicts with state-mandated dietary goals or environmental goals that are linked to your digital identity.
And the carbon footprint example seems to come up a lot.
It's the most discussed and maybe the most chilling example. The ability to prohibit the purchase of flight tickets or, high carbon goods if a personal carbon quota, which is linked directly to your CBDC wallet and your identity profile, has been exceeded.
That just joys it.
Yeah.
It fundamentally changes the relationship between a citizen and the state. If your money can only be spent on approved items or based on your compliance score, it's not fungible currency anymore. It is a granularly controlled tool of behavioral modification.
It shifts from being an economic medium to an absolute tool of social compliance. The transition from a permissionless bearer asset to a permissioned government voucher is the most critical conceptual trap being laid right now.
So your freedom to operate autonomously is directly tied to the universal, unscrutinized acceptance of your currency.
And once that permission structure is embedded in the money itself, your daily life is entirely predicated on your level of compliance with whatever the central planning mandates are that day.
So if the full CBDC, the programmable, traceable, the shock-collared money, if that's the digital cage, the next logical question has to be, how are they quietly building the structural infrastructure for it right now? And this brings us to the introduction of FedNow, as what the sources call the critical Trojan Horse.
This is a classic boiling frog mechanism. It's focused entirely on seductive convenience. FedNow, launched by the Federal Reserve in July 2023, is the U.S.'s real-time instant payment system.
And it's sold to the public purely on the promise of speed.
Purely. The elimination of the archaic 3-day hold-on checks, the guarantee of instant paychecks, 247-365 settlement. It is undeniably convenient, which ensures widespread adoption by commercial banks and then by the public.
But that convenience is the mask. I mean, we already have Zelle and Venmo offering near-instant payments. So what is the specific structural function that FedNow fills that is absolutely necessary for the final CBDC flip? It has to be more than just speed.
It's the plumbing. Right now, the Federal Reserve acts as the ultimate wholesaler of money. It only banks commercial banks.
Right. You and I don't have an account at the Fed.
Exactly. You, the citizen, interact with retailers. Your Chase, your Bank of America. FedNow, however, lays the necessary real-time rail infrastructure to connect the Federal Reserve's core systems directly, instantly, and continuously to every single banking institution, every payroll processor, and eventually every merchant in the economy.
So FedNow isn't the final product. It's the highway. It allows the central bank to interact directly with every node in the economy, bypassing the traditional commercial bank system.
That's the perfect way to put it. Our sources highlight the technical backbone here. FedNow mandates the adoption of modern global messaging standards like ISO 2022.
Okay, what is that?
It's a powerful, highly structured standard that allows for data-rich payment messages, far more granular than older systems. This real-time, data-rich rail infrastructure is the crucial precursor.
So it carries more information with each transaction.
A lot more. And the source material states that once this infrastructure is widely adopted, once every point-of-sale system and payroll system is plugged into this FedNow real-time rail flipping the switch to a fully programmable direct liability CBDC becomes a simple, seamless software update.
A software update. A shift in the legal structure of the digital dollar, implemented via a mandatory network update. That thought is profoundly unsettling.
It is.
You wake up one morning, and the money that's settled through FedNow is no longer just a representation of a bank deposit, but it's a token that's programmed with an expiry date or restricted against certain politically undesirable purchases. And the underlying network was already built and mandatory.
The smart money perspective views the widespread adoption of FedNow not as some benign innovation in payment speed, but as the critical installation of the underlying surveillance and control grid that makes absolute control technically feasible.
And the commercial banks are just sort of marginalized in this process.
Slowly but surely. They currently act as a small buffer between you and the Fed, but they are building the infrastructure for direct communication between the central authority and the individual wallet. Once that direct line is established, the possibilities for granular control are, well, they're limitless.
This transition brings us to the next crucial question. Why the urgency? Why do they need this level of structural control over the flow and use of currency? And this takes us to Section 3, the economic nightmare, the forced destruction of savings.
Right. And this connects directly to the global burden of unpayable debt.
So this shifts the motive from social control to systemic necessity.
Exactly. The underlying issue is the economy's deep structural addiction to continuous stimulus and this massive debt overhang. Central banks know that when the next major deflationary crisis hits, their standard recessionary tools like lowering interest rates will be ineffective, or the rates will already be at zero.
They'll run out of road.
They need a radical, powerful lever to force liquidity, and that lever is the implementation of deeply negative interest rates, or NIRP.
Explain how CBDCs eliminate the economic defense known as the zero bound, because that's what prevents NIRP from being effective in a cash economy.
The zero bound is, it's the point at which interest rates can't really drop below zero because people will just pull their funds out.
They'll just take the cash.
Right. In a world with physical cash, cash acts as the ultimate shield. If a commercial bank tries to charge you, say, -3% annually to hold your $50,000, you have a recourse. You withdraw the physical cash and you put it in a safe.
Right.
The physical dollar is a zero-yielding asset. It doesn't grow, but it doesn't decay either. It stops the central bank from pushing rates too far into the negative because everyone will just choose the cash option.
But if cash is successfully eliminated, or just made prohibitively difficult to use, which is the stated goal of the war on cash, that defense is gone. The citizen is trapped inside the digital system.
Precisely. If all your wealth exists as a digital liability within the central bank's centralized system, there is no escape. The central bank can then implement arbitrarily deep negative rates, forcing you to move your money into productive, risky assets, or simply forcing you to spend it.
Or just watch the numerical value evaporate.
Exactly. The zero bound, the firewall of the saver, is neutralized.
And this leads directly to the ultimate power that, some economists have dreamed of. The ability to enforce consumption. If the economy stagnates because people are saving and hoarding cash, the velocity of money drops.
And CBDCs provide the technological mechanism to force that velocity up. This is the ultimate technological realization of the Keynesian ideal.
How would that work in practice?
Central planners can program digital dollars to lose value over time through a mechanism called demurrage. Imagine a mandatory, continuous decay rate that's coded into the currency itself, maybe 1% monthly.
So your money just melts.
It melts. The citizen faces an unavoidable calculus. You must immediately spend that money, or invest it riskily, or you lose a piece of your stable wealth every 30 days.
So savings, which for generations has represented prudence and stability, becomes a systemic liability that has to be destroyed for the greater good of the economy.
That is the core insight. In a CBDC regime engineered for this purpose, savings moves from being a prudent act of financial stability to becoming, effectively, a crime against the economy.
Right.
Hoarding money is seen as decreasing velocity and slowing the central bank's desired stimulus effect. The technology allows them to ensure money inherently burns a hole in your pocket by programming its decay.
This system is designed not to preserve individual wealth accumulation,
but to maintain systemic liquidity and control, even at the absolute expense of the average citizen's future planning.
So if enforced decay is worrying, Section 4 focuses on the terrifying next step. Not just losing a small percentage, but the outright deletion of your funds. This is the terrifying threat, money with an expiry date.
And this is where programmable money truly redefines ownership in a frightening way. And it's not hypothetical. We have a detailed, non-theoretical laboratory for this mechanism in the form of the China model, specifically their central bank digital currency, the ECNY.
We have to detail the 2021 example in Chengdu because this proved the immediate, irreversible power of this technology.
The case study is absolutely crucial. In 2021, and again in subsequent trials across cities like Suzhou and Shenzhen, the Chinese government conducted these massive red envelope giveaways of digital yuan.
But these weren't charity.
Not at all. The funds were issued with a strict, non-negotiable, pre-programmed condition. They had a defined expiry date. The window was short, sometimes as little as 2 weeks.
And if you didn't spend it?
If those funds were not actively spent on goods or services by the deadline, they were simply deleted from the digital wallet. They vanished entirely.
Deleted, not transferred, not repurposed, just outright confiscated through expiration.
Yeah.
What was the government's stated goal for employing this extreme power?
Their official reasoning was always framed around stimulating local consumption and preventing hoarding. And from their perspective, it was a highly effective instant stimulus tool. But the technological implication is undeniable. They possess the kill switch. They don't need to chase the money, they just wait for the clock to run out.
This power demonstrates revocable ownership at its most absolute.
It does.
Can you drive home the implications of this power on long-term stability, on the pursuit of, the traditional American dream?
The implications are devastating for any attempt at financial security. First and foremost, this technology instantly destroys the ability to build intergenerational wealth.
Right.
If your capital has a decay rate or a defined expiry date, you cannot save for your children's education, you can't pass on capital across decades, and you can't accumulate enough critical mass to make long-term foundational investments like a down payment on a house without taking on significant debt.
The citizen is forced to always start from scratch.
It sounds like this central planner is essentially controlling the clock speed and efficiency of every individual's financial life, forcing them to adopt the system's velocity.
Exactly. It forces the entire population to adopt a hand-to-mouth existence, regardless of their income or their saving discipline. It turns citizens into pure, speed-controlled consumers, constantly running on what the source material calls the central planner's hamster wheel.
Perpetually desperate to spend capital before the system consumes it.
And if you can't store energy, you can't build capital.
The final analysis here is structural. Wealth is fundamentally stored energy. It is the ability to conserve the productive output of your past labor and deploy it for greater utility in the future.
Okay.
The CBDC expiry date ensures that this storage constantly and mandatorily leaks, making it structurally impossible for the average citizen to accumulate capital, build stability, or achieve any degree of independence outside the system's immediate control.
If you cannot store energy, you cannot project power or autonomy into the future.
You can't.
That profound lack of autonomy brings us to the critical question in Section 5, the digital exile. Can this level of financial weaponization happen in a Western democracy? And the answer, tragically, is yes. The precedent was set vividly during the Canada moment in February 2022 during the trucker protests.
The Canada moment was a global red pill moment for anyone observing financial sovereignty. It was the unequivocal proof that even in a supposed Western democracy governed by the rule of law, digital money is not an owned asset. It is a permission slip, entirely subject to political whim.
Detail the unprecedented nature of the Canadian government's response. Because they didn't initially deploy traditional state power like police or military. They used financial power.
That is the crucial observation. The government invoked the Emergencies Act, which granted it extraordinary temporary powers, and the initial response was a surgical strike executed not by police, but by the financial system. The government sent rapid, direct emails to commercial banks, ordering them to instantly freeze the bank accounts of key protesters and, chillingly, anyone who had donated even a small amount to their cause.
And we have to stress the complete absence of due process in that moment.
There was zero due process. No criminal charge was required. No conviction was needed. There was no judge's order necessary for a financial seizure.
Just an email.
It was just an instant digital order resulting in immediate, life-altering financial punishment. The consequences were instant and severe. People could not access their salaries. They couldn't pay their rent or mortgages. They couldn't buy gasoline for their vehicles or purchase basic food supplies.
This is the ultimate severity of the consequence. This wasn't a bureaucratic delay. This was sudden, catastrophic digital exile from society, proving that your access to the economy is entirely dependent on a permission slip that can be instantly revoked.
And this brings us back to the core defensive fear that's emphasized by our source material. They want to turn off your ability to buy food.
It's that basic.
It is. Once you are exiled from the banking system in a modern, cashless society, your ability to meet basic human needs just vanishes. The Canada moment proved that instant digital money freezing is an extremely effective, nonviolent weapon against political dissent.
And the most terrifying insight from that is how this process would function under a fully operational CBDC regime. It wouldn't require an Emergency Act proclamation and a flurry of emails and, fax machines.
Yeah, it becomes frictionless and automated. The friction of the intermediary commercial banks is removed. Attending the wrong political meeting, donating to a candidate deemed subversive, or even sharing information that violates some future social compliance protocol.
It could be instantly codified.
Instantly codified into a transaction failure. Your digital wallet is paused. Your attempted purchase of groceries at the supermarket results in an automated transaction failed message, or a partial lockdown on spending that's deemed non-essential.
The financial weaponization becomes instant, ubiquitous, and silent. And none of this control is possible without universal information. That brings us to Section 6, the Panopticon Total Information Awareness. This surveillance is the final, inescapable ingredient for absolute control.
Right, and we saw the prelude to this in that long-running political fight over the IRS's desire to lower transaction reporting thresholds.
The $600 fight again.
The hat fight is so instructive because it reveals the target. The
Mhm.
government was not primarily targeting billionaires hiding assets in Panama. They were targeting you.
The little guy.
The informal economy, the side hustles, the casual cash jobs, the Venmo payments between friends, the garage sale economy. Any economic activity outside the centralized, perfectly auditable financial system was the target.
And a CBDC eliminates the need for the IRS to even fight for these thresholds because the system is inherently built to report and record everything instantaneously.
Absolutely. The CBDC grants the government, or any agency that's plugged into the central ledger, a complete God view of the entire economy. It renders financial privacy structurally impossible. If cash is successfully eliminated, there is literally no private transaction remaining in the digital realm.
Can you detail the scope of that exposure? What level of intimate detail is logged and immutable in this centralized ledger?
Everything. Every single time you buy a coffee, every magazine subscription, every donation you make to a small church or a political cause you believe in, every online purchase of a book, every purchase of medical supplies, nothing is hidden.
And that centralization creates a profile.
A vast, detailed, and immutable behavioral and ideological profile of every single citizen. And because it is central bank money, this data is readily available to regulators and potentially law enforcement without a warrant.
And the ultimate danger, the end state of this universal surveillance, is the linkage of that financial data to external, non-financial social metrics.
This is the convergence point. That transaction data doesn't just sit in a vacuum. It's linked to your digital identity, which can then be tied to a dynamic social credit score, as is happening in other parts of the world, or, chillingly, a carbon footprint score.
So your spending habits could directly affect your social standing or your freedoms.
Without a doubt. If the central system notes repeated transactions for non-essential international flight tickets or specific consumer goods deemed high carbon, that financial data feeds directly into a mechanism that can trigger restrictions, fines, or denial of future purchases.
This is the operational definition of the digital panopticon.
It is the creation of a centralized prison where the system, the Federal Reserve, the IRS, environmental agencies, can effectively see into every transaction all the time. And the most shocking element, as the source points out, is that citizens are actively paying for the construction of their own digital cells through the tax dollars that fund this massive centralized infrastructure.
Financial surveillance becomes a mandatory, inescapable condition of economic participation, and non-compliance means instant digital exile. It's a profound, fundamental shift from being a sovereign individual operating within a private realm
To being a centrally managed participant whose every economic decision is subject to oversight.
So, if the cage is closing, where do we build the autonomous lifeboat? That brings us to Section 7, the playbook for freedom. Holding assets as an act of rebellion. This is all about defense and structural resilience.
The smart money understands that you cannot stop powerful global entities from exploring and piloting the CBDC system, but you absolutely can build structural resilience outside of that permission structure.
Okay.
It requires assembling a diversified privacy stack assets defined by the fact that they sit inherently outside the digital banking system and do not require permission to transact or exist.
Let's start with the most basic immediate defense, which we have to embrace while it remains legal. physical cash.
Mm.
Why, even as a legacy system, is it the first layer of defense?
Because while it is still legal, cash represents absolute finality and permissionless access. It is the only guaranteed peer-to-peer transaction medium when the power grid fails, when the internet is down, or, most critically, when your digital account is frozen by an immediate political or technical order.
It's your emergency fallback.
Cash is the first line of defense against sudden digital exile. Every emergency fund should include a substantial portion in physical bills. It is a necessary hedge against systemic failure and centralized control.
Next, we move to physical wealth that transcends the immediate currency system and has historically served as a refuge: gold and silver.
Gold and silver are the original decentralized finance. They're physical, they're tangible, and crucially, they carry zero counterparty risk.
Meaning what, exactly?
It means their value is not dependent on the solvency of a bank, a government, or a centralized server farm. This is wealth that cannot be hacked, frozen, or deleted with a software update. If you hold the physical bullion, you own it anonymously.
In a world where every digital transaction is tracked and controlled, physical precious metals represent wealth autonomy.
Holding them, in the context of the war on cash, is a quiet but firm act of financial rebellion against a centralized, permissioned system.
And finally, the digital asset created explicitly as a philosophical counterpoint to the central bank's ultimate control: Bitcoin. How does the smart money integrate this into the privacy stack?
Bitcoin is viewed not merely as a high-risk investment, but as a crucial shelling point for freedom and the world's most robust digital bearer asset.
A digital bearer asset.
This is the key technical distinction. If you practice self-custody, meaning you hold your own private keys, typically on a hardware wallet, and you don't leave your assets on a centralized exchange, nobody can confiscate, freeze, or delete that wealth. The architecture of the network makes it censorship-resistant by design.
So Bitcoin is the optical opposite of a CBDC. The CBDC is a centralized liability requiring permission to use. Bitcoin, when self-custodied, is decentralized asset ownership requiring no permission whatsoever.
Exactly. The source material is unequivocal. If you don't hold the private key, you don't own the money. The core defense mechanism against the digital cage is self-custody and diversification into assets that defy centralization.
And this extends beyond just Bitcoin.
Yes, this also includes learning and utilizing tools in the broader decentralized finance, DeFi space technologies that actively eliminate the need for centralized intermediaries like traditional banks and escrow services, ensuring that transactions remain peer-to-peer and permissionless.
The thesis here is powerful, actionable, and defensive. You cannot stop the global CBDC system from being built, but you absolutely can build your own autonomous lifeboat by diversifying your liquid wealth outside of the permission system and embracing self-custody.
It's a strategy built on resilience, redundancy, and independent operation.
It's recognizing that the war on cash is fundamentally a war on your autonomy.
And the defense requires embracing assets defined by their independence from the very entities seeking absolute control. This shift requires vigilance, education, and deliberate action to protect your future stability.
We've covered a remarkable amount of ground today, moving from the seductive convenience of instant payments to the terrifying reality of programmable, expiring money and the automation of financial exile.
The ultimate synthesis of this deep dive lies in recognizing the nature of the trade-off we're being asked to make. We have to understand that programmable money is not owned, but merely accessed under terms that can be instantly revoked.
We're trading the autonomy of cash for the convenience of instant settlement.
And the price of that trade is the total forfeiture of control.
And they will market this shift flawlessly. They will sell it as ultimate convenience, faster payments, reduced transaction fees, less crime, easier tax collection. They'll tell you that it stops tax cheats and terrorists. That is the necessary bait to ensure compliance.
But we must never lose sight of the core implication, the ultimate mechanism of the shot collar and the closing digital cage.
A system that can stop a terrorist or a tax cheat with the push of a button is fundamentally a system designed to stop you with the push of a button.
When you look at the evidence, the ability to instantly freeze accounts without due process, the power to mandate expiry dates, and the technology to enforce consumption through program decay, the question shifts entirely. It is no longer, is this convenient?
It's, what does ownership even mean when the rules governing my wealth can be changed, or the money itself can be revoked, deleted, or programmed to restrict my movement based on my compliance?
That's the question.
We want you, the learner, to reflect deeply on this central conflict. Of all the mechanisms of control we discussed today, the expiry date, The lack of due process, shown in the Canada moment, the inability to save due to mandated decay, or the panopticon surveillance. What aspect of this closing digital cage stands out to you as the most dangerous threat to your personal freedom? Think about the essential, unbridgeable difference between permission currency and permissionless wealth. That is the future battleground for autonomy.